Lone Trail is just insane. There were always a couple of Arknights events which stuck out from all of the others. Who is Real made us understand the Nyan siblings, Originium Dust explained a lot of details about living on Terra, and don't even get me started on Vigilo. But believe me when I say that Lone Trail is more important in its reveals than any other Arknights event ever combined. 6,152.31 meters. That's the height of Terra's sky. At that height there exists a bit of a barrier. This barrier comes with sudden changes in aerodynamics and a rapid decay of power sources. It's impossible to fly higher than that barrier. Hardly anybody questions that fact and hardly anybody gets angry at it. People have just kind of accepted the fact that the sky is off limits from a certain height onwards. The altitude for drones and aerial vehicles has been restricted heavily as well, so that they don't get even close to the barrier, and foul beasts, aka birds, are limited in how high they can fly by instinct. Existing research on the barrier can be considered old and outdated. To modern scientists, the sky is as much of an unsolved natural phenomenon as the ocean is. One thing that needs to be mentioned here, it doesn't seem like it's necessarily common knowledge to the people of Terra that there is a barrier in the sky. It's just seemingly commonly accepted that you shouldn't go beyond a certain height, because it's just not possible. A long time ago, a poet from Ursus came up with a name from that barrier, which we are gonna use throughout this video and in future videos. Starpot. Some time ago there was a couple of Colombian vulpos, the Wright couple. The Wrights once tried to fly up to the height of Terra's sky, and once they reached the 6,152.31 meters mark, both of them lost their lives. This incident was widely discussed in Colombian media at the time, and they were very much criticized for attempting such a thing, and one could almost say that they were ridiculed. The Wright couple had a daughter, Kristen Wright. She witnessed her parents' death on that day. She was very young back then, and it created a strong fixation with the sky inside of her. Kristen would go on to study, to become a researcher, where she met Saria, who told her that she would support her dreams. After graduating, those two would go on to form Rhine Lab together. This ties in wonderfully with the manga, by the way, which I absolutely recommend everybody to read. Back then, Kristen really seemed like a nice, hopeful and positive individual. The nation of Colombia is one of the few nations on Terra that is not a monarchy. It's ruled by a president, the president of Colombia, Mark Max. The nation's capital, Max DC, is named after him, and this guy there is the current vice president Jackson. The vice president gets elected in an election, which is the biggest political event in Colombia. There's lots of national attention on it, and vice presidential candidates often spend their time doing things that will improve their chances in upcoming elections. Currently, Jackson enjoys a decent amount of support in the election polls. Colombia has a strong military led by the Department of Defense. In the 1040s, so around 5 decades before Lone Trail, the Department of Defense was heavily involved in the civil war of the neighboring country, Bolivar. Because of what happened there, the Department of Defense's intervention policy was deemed a failure, and its reputation in front of the public had sunken very low. So low, in fact, that the generals handed over control of the armed forces to the government. From the moment the intervention into Bolivar was deemed a loss, the government has actively worked on suppressing the military. In the past, even after that failure, the Department of Defense has always worked on exploring Colombia's military capabilities. Progress has been steady, and the president also sees this as a good thing. Recent developments on the international stage have turned everything upside down, though. Without spoilering too much, very recently we saw a super weapon which was capable of turning a land ship from this into this. The existence of such a super weapon made all of Columbia's advances into conventional warfare useless in the eyes of the Department of Defense, which became increasingly hawkish following the activation of that weapon. It now started to work on also developing weapons of mass destruction, or as they put it, era-defining strategic weapons. That's where Kristen Wright comes back into play. Kristen became the military's core technical advisor, and in a very short amount of time she presented the plans for a weapon named Ark-01, essentially a big aerial vehicle which would be capable of flying around in order to deliver devastating strikes over extreme distances. The military immediately gave her large amounts of money and resources, as in their eyes a weapon like that would surely restore the image of the Department of Defense in front of the people. The entire endeavor was named Horizon Ark Project. Nobody in the military seemed to really be aware of Kristen's true intentions though. To put it simply, her plan was to use Ark-01 in order to use the weapon against the Starpod and break through the barrier into space or whatever lies beyond that. This has been her true motivation behind cooperating with the military the entire time. The energy that would be required for this, however, far exceeds the energy production of Terra's entire civilization. But Kristen by then had spent a very long time away from Rhinelab, and so she had found a new energy source which she could use. A very, very, very long time ago, there existed a different civilization on Terra. A civilization of people who did not have any animal features and who used words like human nature. But something happened to this civilization. A big calamity hit it, a calamity strong enough to dry up the oceans and rot away rocks. The civilization ended up with very few survivors, and out of sheer desperation, the civilization created the Preserver Project. They constructed special life support devices which would be placed in indestructible hidden underground fortresses. The survivors were to go into them so that once the calamities stopped, those people could then become the seeds of a new civilization. But destruction came harder and sooner than expected. They needed somebody to watch over the life support devices. Using a pure AI for that was deemed as far too risky, therefore one person stepped up to sacrifice themselves. A man named Trevor Friston volunteered to have his consciousness be uploaded into an electronic cloud while his body would be locked away forever deep underground. Friston would be the Preserver. Make no mistake though, with the decision that Trevor Friston made, he ended his own life. The Preserver Project is not a continuation of his actual consciousness, just a devised personality simulation running on a copy of Trevor Friston's consciousness. Friston is a replica of Friston, you may say, although the new Friston retained the original Friston's memories, personality, and of course emotions. Friston was that civilization's last hope, their last pessimistic attempt at continuing to exist. He guarded the hall with the life support devices for a very, very long time, knowing that his waiting had a meaning, as he was overseeing whatever was left of his people. Friston would often try to reach out for survivors in the overworld, but whenever he did that, all he would hear were the sounds of utter destruction. But he would continue to try and shout out into the void. Feeling like it was a futile effort, he would eventually stop to reach out for survivors after countless attempts. It's impossible for Friston to sleep, so he would be constantly fully awake, and while awake, the only thing he would hear were the constant heartbeats of all of the people in the devices. And as time went on, the heartbeats would become weaker and weaker. Friston's mental state would become more and more bad. At some point, the project was supposed to go into the next phase, recovery, during which the people would get out, but he was fully aware of the fact that he was not the actual Friston, he was just a tool, and he knew that even if all of his people came back to life, he would never be a part of them again, as he isn't even a living creature anymore. Friston hates himself. At some point he realized that whatever energy was left in the life support devices would not be enough energy to start the recovery phase of the project. He made the realization that everything up until now has been in vain. Therefore, he personally gave the order to completely shut down the project. He chose to forsake his duty. He on purpose threw all of his efforts over that much time out of the window. But why? During her time away from Rhinelab, Kristen had found Friston and the hall that he was guarding, and he made the decision to give up the energy left for the project to Kristen in order to power her ambition of breaking through the sky. He says that he does not regret the decision at all. We don't know exactly how many life support devices he was guarding. One number we get is hundreds of thousands, and there is a person in each and every single one of them, but none of them will ever wake up again. By the time of Lone Trail, Friston has spent over 13,055 years in this form. Using the energy that Friston gave her, Kristen used Ark-01 in order to break through the starport. Up there she saw the vast space and was able to confirm that Terra was, in fact, a planet. She also found that Terra has only one big moon. The reason Terra's people think that there are two moons is the fact that the barrier is distorting light, which really has prevented them from completely understanding the universe up until now. That's the explanation that Friston gave to Kristen when they first met. He also says at a different point that the barrier is capable of repairing itself and will essentially heal the damage that Kristen dealt to it, although he does not know how long exactly that is going to take. After some time in space, Ark-01 had to shut down with Kristen inside of it. By the way, those life support devices, they are called sarcophagi. Yes, just like the sarcophagus the Doctor got out of during the start of the main story. And that's where it gets very funny. During the story of Lone Trail, the Doctor and Calcid both together find Friston's hall. Friston speaks to them in an unknown language, which the Doctor and Calcid both can understand. Furthermore, he refers to Calcid as Attendant A-Mar-10 and to the Doctor as colleague. Calcid tells Friston that the Doctor is one of Terra and one of Rhodes Island, and Friston shows a reaction to the name Rhodes Island. Most importantly, Friston explicitly tells the Doctor that all of the people in the sarcophagi are his kin. It gets explicitly stated that the Doctor is a part of this ancient lost civilization which once lived on Terra. Following this, we get some more absolutely huge reveals. Originium means unification. That does not mean that the word originium translates into the word unification, just that originium's purpose is unification and creating another state of existence, one where everything exists in disorder. This part needs further examination at a later point, but it really ties well into the big narrative of Originium has shaped life on Terra, which we have been hearing for a very long time. Friston himself says that so far Rhodes Island has been working on curing oripathy and solving the problems related to oripathy, while it also got involved in a couple of other conflicts, but the truth is that Rhodes Island is fighting against Originium itself, as according to Friston, Originium is the root of it all. He says that he doesn't know what priestess exactly decided, but according to him, there is no way to peacefully coexist with Originium. Friston then talks about oripathy. He says that oripathy is not something that was carefully planned and produced, slightly implying that Originium might be carefully planned and produced in contrast to oripathy, because of which curing oripathy will be extremely difficult, but there may be other ways to stop it or to use it. Priestess was mentioned earlier. According to Friston, Priestess is the starting point of all of this madness, and also that the Doctor once was extremely close to Priestess. The past between Priestess and the Doctor is a taboo to Calcit. Friston is aware of that, but according to him there is a reason for everything that has happened. The reason it's a taboo to Calcit is that Priestess herself did not allow Calcit to give the Doctor answers. It's actual restrictions which were carved deeply into her consciousness. Remember, Calcit was called an attendant by Friston earlier. Calcit there also talks about her personal goals or motivation, unity. She says that war, hatred and conflicts among humanity are a far bigger problem than the Seaborn or the demons ever could be. Over all the time that she has been alive, she has seen countless civilizations rise and fall, a cycle that would repeat itself endlessly, but then she met two young Tekas, which were very close to finding a way for civilization to continue. A little note here, Tekas is what Sarkas were called a very long time ago, and those two Tekas she mentions probably refer to Pharisa and Pharises, although that is of course not 100% confirmed. What Calcit says gets us a couple of interesting reactions by Friston. Firstly, he is surprised that the Black Crown still remains on Terra. The Black Crown obviously referring to the powers of the Lord of Fiends, which gets carried by the leader of the Sarkas. Furthermore, Friston calls the Tekas odd endemic life forms, and endemic is a different word for native, and that ties in wonderfully with recent reveals. Not to spoiler too much, but recent main story chapters have heavily implied that the Sarkas, or well, Tekas, were the original inhabitants of Terra, and that all of the other races arrived at a later point, which also once more ties in wonderfully with the entire Originium narrative, because also in recent main story chapters, Calcit personally revealed that while that might be the case, Originium has essentially formed all of the races, whether original inhabitants or not, into one big humanity. They continue to talk. Apparently the south, whatever that means, is in ruins, but what about the north? There's something there at the end of the endless ice field that spans Terra's Arctic north. Calcit is aware of it and has tried to reach it many times in the past, but never found anything up there. But what is there? A door. Friston says that if you push it open, there will be a boundless vista. But Calcit says that opening that door is far from what most are capable of. And I cannot wait for IS-4. When Calcit and the Doctor leave Friston, they encounter President Max of Columbia. Calcit and him are acquainted with each other because, of course, they are, but Max drops a couple of insane reveals too. He says that him and PRTS of Rhodes Island have the same common origin, and that Friston is Max's father. And that it is Max's goal to find the truth and turn Columbia into the sword and shield of Terra, just as Friston envisioned, although Calcit says that Friston never wanted a tyrant. Also, Talos was mentioned. Talos 2, of course, being the setting of Arknights Endfield. Apart from the fact that it was mentioned, which in itself is huge, we learn a bit more. Apparently, there are satellite arrays outside of Talos which would be capable of manipulating the geographical properties of a planet as small as Terra. Thank you for watching, and now you should check out this video to see everything we knew about Terra before Lone Trail. Also check out the second channel, lots of more Arknights over there. Big thank you to Carousel Alpha, Chris, Darth Elder Show, Dimmerboy125, Elite117, Evin Heckler, Jim Shot First, Kivinator, Longoneo, Sylvester, and Zephyr Renix. Cheers!